and a very warm welcome to Engineered Unicorns, fantastic books for a magical lifestyle. My name is SandyJ and we are at Campusradio Karlsruhe. For this episode, we have the following itinerary. First, a little update what I've been up to the last 2 months. Then we follow up with the book recommendations, which you are probably waiting for. And last but not least, we have a little outlook for May. Let's get started with the reading update. First point in the itinerary. Now, the last 2 months, I finished my Goodreads challenge for this year. I'm currently at 60 books, with more of half of them being mangas. And interestingly, because I now have finished it, I feel a lot less stressed and I'm giving myself time to slow down and to not press myself to read more and more and more and faster. So I feel a lot less stressed because of this. And I have a feeling that now I can get to different stuff. So having a low Goodreads score is actually quite good, it seems to me. Over the Easter holidays, I also rearranged my library, my personal library. Normal people call it living room. In my case, it's a library. And I have now my complete physical TBR in my library. It wasn't like this before. I had a small basket where I had books that I wanted to read. Can't recommend it from the weaving. The basket wasn't that closed off, so the books still became a bit dusty. And because they were falling all over each other, the paperbacks were a bit mangled. They weren't stacked nicely in the basket, so they do now need to get pressed a bit. And now it's all in order in my library. They're neatly stacked or neatly put in the shelf, and I now see what I already have in my physical TBR, and it's a lot less stressful because I know and I see now what I have. Though currently I prefer reading ebooks and I'm on an audiobook wall, so I'm reading or listening much more to them. And nevertheless, I try to read more of the books that I already own, and I read 2 of those books that were on my physical TBR that I own. So that was definitely a good decision to put them all together in a room and to stack them nicely. So I now have a feeling that I have tons to read, which is a good thing. It will take quite some time to get through all those books because I haven't counted them, but I'm pretty sure it's way over 50. So it will take some time to get through them, especially since I'm a mood reader. So it's really depending on my mood which book I pick up. I recently picked up Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which I have from the public library of Karlsruhe. And now I'm reading it and I enjoy it. But I'm only at page 26, so not that far in. Let's see how it's going further. Now, I also found this past 2 months that yoga is for me better to be done in the evening. If you are following YouTube, you know that there are a lot of people who post their morning routines, and I do have my own morning routine, but I always struggled to put into action my yoga practice in the morning. And now I found that if I do it right before going to bed, with a nice lo-fi hip-hop music playing, then it's quite good for me and I can wind down before bed and I feel good in my body. If you have a problem to incorporate it into your morning, maybe at night a few stretches are better for you. So just try it. That's my lifestyle tip for you. And I just, as I've said before, I'm currently on a real roll with audiobooks, and I read mostly non-fiction audiobooks. And also I found that I currently prefer non-fiction during the weekdays, during the work week, and I only read or mainly read fantasy and fictional books on my weekend. It just developed like this. Might change next week already, but currently I read non-fiction under the week and I read fictional books on the weekends. I haven't read that much non-fiction books during the last year. It used to be that way, that I always had one non-fiction book on the go before 2020. But during last year, I read mostly fantasy, which might have been because of the year being that crazy. So I probably just didn't like reading non-fiction. So for this month, I will give you 3 audiobooks as a recommendation. The first book that I want to recommend, which is my main recommendation, this was the book that put me on the roll with the audiobooks. I found it via bookstagram, where else? And I downloaded first the audiobook and then I got the physical copy because it's so helpful and because I needed to annotate it. My main book recommendation for this month is Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself by Nedra Glover-Tawwab. She's a Black author and a therapist. The book was just released and there are 2 parts to the book. First, she explains the importance of boundaries, and in the second part, she explains how to set them and what to look out for. Her definition of boundaries is: boundaries are expectations and needs that help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. Expectations in relationships help you stay mentally and emotionally well. Learning when to say no and when to say yes is also an essential part of feeling comfortable when interacting with others. This is definitely making it clear for what those boundaries are. And she makes it also abundantly clear that we often feel like we don't want to set boundaries. And potential reasons following her are: you fear being mean, you fear being rude, you're a people pleaser, you're anxious about future interactions, you feel powerless and are not sure that boundaries will help. And she gives you all those explanations and she gives you examples from her practice as a therapist. And she gives you also direct examples how to set boundaries and what they mean. So she also tells you again and again that it's okay to feel uncomfortable when you set boundaries. It's expected. And you need to expect also that there is, a backlash maybe, that people try to see if your boundaries are really there or if you are giving some leeway. But you need to be firm with the boundaries and you can do it nicely. So she gives you real examples how to set them and how to reclaim them and how to make sure that people understand why there is a boundary. She says it's necessary to make it clear that there is a boundary. And quite often you don't need to rationalize it to those persons why you are setting those boundaries. Naturally, she gives you also ideas and direct quotes how to make sure that you stand your ground, that you be firm in that regard, but also not to come over rude or mean, which is, I think, a reason why often we women tend to hesitate, because when we grow up, we are raised to think always for the others. And she makes it abundantly clear that we can't expect from others that they just know what our boundaries are. We need to make them clear. We need to say, there is my boundary. And then we need to stick to it. And this sticking to it is also not that easy. I found that myself. And it's definitely a learning process, which is why when I read the audiobook, I found I actually need to get the physical copy because I want to annotate it and I want to underline what is speaking to me, what I need to think about. It's much easier to reference. So I highly recommend that you get the audio. It's read by herself, and I quite like her audiobook. It's really well narrated. And the physical book is very good to just annotate it, to reference it, and to look it over. It's easier to find the part that's necessary for you in that regard when you have a boundary violation and how to treat it, and how to reclaim the boundary and how to set it up again or fight for it. So there are different types of boundaries, and she explains them also. There are physical boundaries, then there are intellectual boundaries, there are emotional boundaries, there are sexual boundaries, there are material boundaries, and there are time boundaries. And I think time boundaries are really important. And especially in a workplace, they are hard to set up because when it comes to time boundaries, we often let work creep into our private lives with emails or other stuff. We are feeling always on. And so setting up time boundaries is necessary. And interestingly, this is how I found the other book that I want to recommend to you. But boundaries are also good to make sure that you have the time and the necessary brain space and the necessary means to enjoy your creativity. And that's bringing us to the second book that I want to recommend to you, which is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. You may remember Elizabeth Gilbert because of her other big hit, which was also a movie with Julia Roberts, Eat, Pray, Love. But the book that I want to recommend to you is Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear. It was released in 2015, and it was the perfect follow-up for Set Boundaries and Find Peace, because I needed some reminder how to be creative, and it made me think differently about my podcast. So it was very helpful in that regard. It was also very interesting because she tells her own story and how inspiration and creativity work. And she gives you a permission slip to just be creative, to not think about what your creativity may lead you to, and to not overthink it, and to just do it and be creative. So she performed this audiobook herself also. And it's a very good audiobook. I absolutely recommend it. It's perfect as a follow-up for Set Boundaries and Find Peace, because if you are even a little bit creative, no matter what you do creatively, if it's baking or if it's also doing some writing or whatever it is, or painting or whatever, she talks about how inspiration and how to get inspired for this. And as she says, you don't need to have an outcome in it, and you to move it from the hobby status and just creating to making a living from it. It's just there to be creative. And so I personally quite liked it. And to make time for your creativity, you may be needing to find a way to not get sucked down into infinity pools. And what infinity pools are is made abundantly clear in Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters Every Day by Jake Knapp and John Zaretsky. And it was published in 2018. Both of them are software engineers, and they worked for Google and other big tech companies. And they found over the time that they are drawn way too much to their screens. And they found that those screens took away from the important stuff. So they tried out different ways how to make time for the things that matter. And so those two are narrating the audiobook themselves. You just, from the whole dynamic between them, you actually find that they are really friends in real life. And I really enjoyed this audiobook, so I highly recommend it. And they are giving you a definition for infinity pools for essentially everything that has autoplay and has just pool to refresh on your phone is an infinity pool. So best example from my own life, I can tell you, Instagram is an infinity pool, YouTube is an infinity pool. So they don't have a natural end to them for the usage. So those are infinity pools, and to not get sucked into them, but still enjoy them. They give you real hands-on tips how to deal with them. They are by far not as extreme as the other book that I listened to, which was Digital Minimalism. And I quite like them because it's much more fun to read that book, to listen to them, than to the other book. And those ideas are easily incorporated, and they give you quite a lot of tools to use to get through to your own time back again. And they encourage you to play with them and to find out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. For example, they both use iPhones, and they both had to find different ways how to deal with them. So they have real life stories, and they also know the other side because they worked for those tech companies who implemented those infinity pools. So they do know both sides, and they learned how to deal with them. And so their book is quite helpful, in my opinion. So these are my 3 recommendations for you. Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself by Nedra Glover-Tawwab. Then Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear. And last but not least, Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters Every Day by Jake Knapp and John Zaretsky. 3 very helpful books and definitely worth the read in audio. Just check them out. Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover-Tawwab is not available currently at Karlsruhe's library system. Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert you can find at the American Library in Karlsruhe. And Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters is available at Karlsruhe Library System, but in the German version. So those are my recommendations. I'm quite excited for one book release in May. On May 11th, P. Djeli Clark's A Master of Djinn will be released. P. Djeli Clark, as you may know, is a Black author, and he released several steampunk or fantasy novellas over the last years in a world which is close to ours but still has magic in it. And it's set in 1912 Cairo. And this book is also in this world. And I read first sentence of the sneak peek and I just put it away because I didn't want to have a book hangover from just a sneak peek because I knew when I read this first sentence that I wanted to just read the whole book. And so I just put it away until I have the book. And the first sentence that was written in A Master of Djinn is, Archibald James Portendorf disliked chairs. I don't know what it is about this sentence, but I absolutely love it. And this means I want to read this whole book in one sitting, which is probably not possible because it's a full-length novel. But I'm really excited for it, and I pre-ordered it, and yeah, I can't wait to read it. So there's a Black author book release that I want to talk about. And this already concludes this episode. Music, as always, by Erwin Schmidt. You can find the show notes at Campusradio Karlsruhe or in your podcast app. My name is SandyJ. You are listening to Campusradio Karlsruhe. See you soon.